Welcome to Our Dyke Histories. I'm your host, Jack Gieseking, historian, geographer, and environmental psychologist. We dive into the past and present of les, queer, trans, sapphic, MB communities decade by decade in collaboration with multicultural lesbian literary and art journal Sinister Wisdom. This season, we're all about dyke bars, with an asterisk. Lesbian bars, queer parties, and trans hangouts. The structures that made them necessary, the lives they made possible, and the worlds we made from them. Our Dyke Histories. Come for the history, stay for the revolution, gossip, and desire that built us. Welcome back to the 1980s. We have returned to again jam in this episode 2 of our focus on dyke bars in the 80s with the fantastic authors Sarah Schulman and Katherine Forrest, and the amazing activist Valerie Walker. We're going to continue from part 1 and continue to talk about race and racism in the bars, the activism against it. We'll talk about the deep, complicated, amazing way that fiction, both in text and screen, has significantly shaped our ideas of ourselves. Of course, we will not be able to stop talking about sex parties. We're also going to dive into all things gentrification, which I'm a tad giddy about. We're also going to talk a little bit about what happened to feminism during the 1980s, the Barnard Sex Conference, the porn sex wars, the essentialism, social constructionism debates. I promise it's utterly fascinating, and it will make you think again about what you know about lesbi, queer, trans history, about the world, about dyke bars, and about geography too. Again, we'll be diving into all things sex in bars and parties and how that goes along or doesn't with the religious right. We're going to pick up right where we left off by talking about how segregation and racism structure these spaces and at the same time create a place to be among your people, whomever they may be. We can also see how Black queer bars that really grow in number in the 1980s give so much a sense of community and home that wasn't available previously. We're also going to come back to talking about this moment in the 1980s where people increasingly realize if bars are the main place that defines you, there's going to be a huge amount of alcoholism that they're part of by being part of bar society. In the 1980s, there were at least 200 lesbian bars. There's probably so many more. 200 is the number my friend Gregor Mattson came up with by counting them all in a book called The Damron Guides. The thing is, there's tons of dyke bars that didn't bother to put an ad in there, reach out, get recorded, or didn't even want to be known to be put in a book like that. It's in the 1980s, as I mentioned in the last episode, the first LGBTQ AA meetings kick off, NA, OA, etc. And this is super important because coming out about your sexuality and gender needs to happen in a safe space because a lot of people are drinking because they don't feel safe in their sexuality and gender. People are dying of HIV/AIDS. No one's doing research about it. And they're being told from the religious right that the reason they have AIDS is because God wants to punish them. We can see why a lot of people were drinking and doing drugs. And at the same time, we can see how the bars gave life to so much connection and community. I want to also bring up this point of alcoholism, because at what point are you all hanging out, organizing, when you all realize, wow, we're sharing in this? Because somehow by the 1990s, people are hanging out at AA and NA meetings instead of going to the bars. So what is that tipping point, which is deeply racialized? And then are you welcome in AA, NA meetings, and they become their own kind of lesbian bar, for lack of a better word, although no one would call it that.
Well, people say that that's what killed the bars in San Francisco. I mean, that's always been the claim, right? Was people getting sober. I mean, you know, I had this other life in the East Village that was separate from that, where there was a lot of drugs. And, you know, there were people who, you know, women in that neighborhood. There was a lesbian writer who was a coke dealer and got murdered. And most of those people are sober now, not everybody. But that was separate from like Lesbian Avengers. I mean, Valerie, what did you think? There was no drugs in Lesbian Avengers.
I mean, I know there were drugs in the lesbian ventures because I did a lot of them.
But not like heroin. Yeah.
But I wasn't ever really a heavy drinker. So that kind of, and I have a lot of energy. And so I think heavy drinkers weren't particularly attracted to me as a friend to hang out with. So I didn't have a community of heavy drinkers, but I did have a community of like, fad drug using and a lot of queer men, used a lot of drugs that are available and alcohol as well. So I saw it from afar. And I definitely picked people up from their AA meetings, and then we pressed on and went and socialized and da 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 da. So, but I was always adjacent to it.
I mean, now a lot of queer parties, bars, hangouts have problems making money on alcohol because people are showing up high. They, if they're in a state with an edible, or they can just get them from out of state, and they're not making money on the main thing they make money on.
But I think you need to tell people, look, if this is a space you value, this is the daily cover of alcohol sales that we must meet. You know what I mean? And maybe that means you don't have to buy any drinks because Sally Joe just got her Friday check and she's, taking care of it. We have to have a community response. We just can't assume that these spaces are going to be there continually. Like, I wept when Crazy Nannies closed. Wept.
Tell us about Crazy Nannies.
Double decker. Yeah. That was a 2-floor. Get it. First of all, I'm going to put it out there. There wasn't a gay club I went to. I didn't have sex in, but Crazy Nannies was a lovely place to do your thing, to live your life out loud. It was just beautiful, and you had something for everybody. The pool table, the dance floor upstairs. It had 2 bathrooms, so the lines were never like that deep. Mm-hmm. The people that stayed right at the front of the bar were a whole different social mix than the people who sat at the tables or the little alcoves on the second floor. It had all these different vibes at the same time, so you could bounce from one to the other, to the other, to the other. It was very dynamic. It felt also homey.
Yeah. And Nanny's is the only Black lesbian bar in Greenwich Village ever.
Like, I was like, you can stop talking now.
And it opens in 1987. And the more I dug into it, I'm like, how did this open? What happened? And there was an economic recession in 1987. And New York City property values.
But also, like, queer people of color had always come to the Village, and there were a lot of Black gay male bars. Yeah. There was Keller's, was the most famous, right on West Side Highway. There was One Potato. There was a whole bunch of places. And, the whole pier scene was queer kids of color who did not live in that neighborhood. So that's an old history.
The pier scene, that's not a piercing, although we're really good at those. It's about the Christopher Street Pier. At the end of Christopher Street, which is the street that Stonewall is on, which is the street that there are tons of LGBTQ businesses and bars and hangouts. And it's just a really, really gay street. At the far end of it, you keep walking west, you hit the end of Manhattan, and there is a pier, pier number 40. This is an active waterfront, an active pier scene until it was left behind and dilapidated. And so in the 1970s, LGBTQ people started cruising and hanging out. This is a giant, giant wooden pier deep out into the water with a view of New Jersey. And on that pier, you can fuck, you can hang out. There's kind of a building falling apart. Unfortunately, there's rats. You can jump in the water. It's toxic, but go for it, right? It's New York. You got to live. If you are Black and poor in New York City, and you're coming from the Bronx, and you're coming from Queens, and you're coming from Brooklyn, you're coming from Harlem, you need a place to meet. And the pier was this kind of left behind space that Black, queer, trans youth took over. This is where voguing really cooked off, and that's why it's in Paris is Burning. It's also in the background of the YMCA video, as in the Village people, as in YMCA. I don't know if they'll delete me if I sing it, but you queers know what I mean. Anyway, the pier scene was an incredibly important space, and it used to be a lot more white. I'll show you on a Queer Geographies post about how white it was in the 1970s, but as gay men got other spaces for cruising and came a little bit more indoors with their increasing wealth, and also because so many gay men were dying, you see an uptick in youth using this space, and that continued until the 2000s. The Christopher Street Pier is an incredibly important space in all of queer history. because you can't always afford to go to bars, right? When you can't afford to be home and you can't afford to go to an official bar, and even you're too young, you make a space of your own. But beyond that, there's other kinds of bars that people, when they can't afford one, they can't get to one, they're too afraid to go to one, and that is the dyke bars of fiction and the dyke bars of art. These bars are based on real bars. Even as far back in 1928, when Radcliffe Hall wrote The Well of Loneliness, there's a dyke bar in there. It's based on real places like Paris's La Fetiche. Yes, that means the fetish. And Natalie Barney's Salon and lesbian brothels. Just wait for my Paris episode, y'all. That said, we're about to talk about Kate Delafield, the first lesbian detective of fictional history. We live in a time now where prison and police abolition are at the forefront of our political agenda, and thank the goddesses for it. In the 1980s, the idea was that representation would make things better. If we could get a lesbian on the police force, if we had people to show who we were. Let me give you a story to illustrate how long this view lasted. In the year 2000, my best friend from college said, "Come on down to DC. I'm running all the Pride events and speakers the day before the march, and it would be amazing to have you here. It'll be so fun." So I get on a train, I come down, I'm excited to just have a great time. But when I get there, because this is my best friend, she says, "Actually, I need you to be the head of security. You guys don't know this, but I'm tall, I'm 6 foot tall, and I'm a big trans, but I think you could possibly tell that I'm a bit of a softie." Yet what she does is she puts my baseball hat on backwards, which I love to do. It was the early aughts. Cuts the sleeves off my shirt and puts dark sunglasses on me. And she said, "Stand here in front of Katie Curtis, the lesbian folk artist, and Tammy Faye Baker, a religious right leader who became incredibly pro-LGBTQ by that point, and look fierce." So I did my best. At the end of the night, working all of the security, Kate says to me, "We have to put the golf carts back. The hotel in the DuPont neighborhood had loaned us some of their golf carts to get around town and get things done." And so, listeners, this was a life highlight. I got to race a golf cart on Pennsylvania Avenue in the middle of the night, right past the White House. And the only way we got to do it is, very unfortunately, we had a police escort. At that point in Washington, D.C., there was one out gay male police officer and one out gay lesbian. That was it. Only those two. This is a good moment to bring up what the Nightwood Bar was like, Catherine, and to talk about murder at the Nightwood Bar, because you're writing in the 1980s. How did you imagine a 1980s lesbian bar?
In that book, Kate Delafield lived her life the way most of us lived. We were like in sort of overlapping circles, that she was not a part of any community at all. She was not even aware of any community. It was just that we all knew certain people who knew certain people. And that's how most of us, we grew up in isolation and we sort of lived in isolation. And we did find other people like us. And Murder at the Nightwood Bar is the absolutely linchpin book of the series, because this is the book where Kate is connected with community, a lot of it in negative ways because she's a police officer, and relationships with law enforcement were downright hostile. It was an incredibly homophobic organization. My partner at the time, Sheila, and I went to all sorts of lesbian bars because I knew what I wanted for the setting, and I was looking for a bar that I might use as an actual location. And so I went to bars in LA, San Diego, kind of all up and down San Francisco. And I ended up using a real locale because the bar is on La Brea Avenue in LA in an actual location, but it's a fictional bar. I kind of came up with sort of a wish fulfillment bar that had a bookcase and games and some other stuff like that. But the best thing about it was that Kate not only was forced to actually connect with community, but it was a community that reflected to me the absolute glory of our community, because ideally we welcome all races, all colors, all creeds, all genders, or no gender. And there's a representation of that across that spectrum in the lesbian bar, So I began with that. The other thing that happened with the series that was very important to me as a lesbian, as a writer, that I was thinking about coming into this was women had just won the court cases against these police organizations. We were either jail matrons or we were juvenile officers. So we had won the court cases, and we were finally starting to move up into the echelons of police work for good or ill. And I think when I wrote Amateur City, I absolutely intended it to be, kind of like following in the footsteps of Sarah Paretsky and having a private eye, kind of an amateur detective. And then I realized I had to have the police on the scene. And that's when Kate Delafield walked onto the page. And I realized what I had in her. And it turns out, I had no idea at the time, why the 1980s, she is the first lesbian police officer in American literature. I mean, that's just sort of the way it was. And she also represented to me the absolutely best case for being in the closet. Homophobic organization, lethally. And the 10 books to me are an examination of what the closet costs, because they cost Kate Delafield a lot. And in the final 2 books in the series, she kind of meets herself in a crossroads, and she comes to really kind of understand just her trajectory. So
Okay.
let me just add that the women at the lesbian bar, they pervade the series. This is Kate's spiritual home. It is, and the bartender, Maggie Schaefer, is her closest and dearest friend. She keeps up with all of the women that she meets in Murder at the Nightwood Bar. I mean, it's a hymn to community. The bars were our community. I think today, without a doubt, because we've sort of evolved from bars to bookstores, now it's social media. And I hear from women I haven't seen in years, from all over the country. And Sarah, you and I on tour, didn't we meet the most fabulous women, the most amazing women? Didn't it make you so proud of our community?
I met everybody. Like, I stayed with women who were filthy rich and had a horse farm in Richmond, Virginia. I stayed with someone in a trailer who worked at a paper mill in Seattle. I stayed at the home of a post office worker in Missouri who sent me money so I could buy new sneakers. And I eventually paid her back. Yeah, it was incredible. And we traveled by Greyhound bus. Yeah.
That would make a great TV series. It really would.
I really do think someone should option the idea of a young Sarah Schulman traveling the U.S. We're going to turn back to sex parties because, why not? Why was sex so key to the spaces we were forming in the 80s? Obviously, part of what's happening is sex is changing. People now need to learn how to have sex all over again. We become incredibly fearful of sex. Am I going to die if I do it? People didn't know if lesbians could transmit HIV/AIDS. From my research, there's been one case ever. But how scared were people of sex? How much was it shaping their lives? Well, the group The Gay Men's Health Crisis was formed, and they started making pamphlets and flyers about how to use condoms, how great they were, or how you weren't going to lose sensitivity, how sex was still going to be great. But people were afraid. So GMHC had a great idea. They were going to make porn. This is a very important, wildly recognized nonprofit that decides to make porn. So first they make this porn about these 2 white guys in the Pines, this truly bougie New York vacation spot, getting it on, super sexy with condoms. And so many people see this and say, why are we looking at white rich people? Fuck. And GMHC says, oh, we're racist idiots. So they make this really sexy, hot, black working class porn in a car wash. And they make interracial porn. They make Latinx queer porn. And they make them in all different places with all kinds of class elements and all kinds of sites to really get people to feel safe again. It totally works. I will link you to the paper on queer geographies about this. It's awesome. Hopefully, if you're not already thinking it, I was, because when COVID happened, I remember thinking, wow, we're going to have to be taught to be near one another again. And that was an incredible failure of the state, of the world, to teach us intimacy again. We can see that in younger generations. For those of you who don't know what's happening in colleges, students aren't talking to one another. They'll just text, but they won't actually talk to one another. Friendships are at an all-time low. People are afraid of sex again. We need to teach each other. We need to see representation of how we are safe and desired and needed.
About the bar and then the politics and sort of what that was like together, I think that's when you got the sex party. Because that's when you got an organization, had somebody sitting at a table distributing condoms and information about safer sex. So that sort of was also a kind of movement that happened in there.
Well, that got very confused because, ACT UP, people got very confused about whether or not women could transmit HIV to each other. And I think it's proven that
Right.
you can't. But there were people who felt like they could because there was so much emotional proximity to these guys. And also a lot of women had sex with the men in ACT UP. So there was this projected fear so women went to these elaborate, quote, safe sex things that they actually didn't need to do. But Wonder Bar had a back room for women that was mostly run by ACT UP women, but they were obsessed with this safe sex thing. So it was this mix of creating obstacles and then creating opportunities. It was very conflicted.
I think Red is creating the Submit Sex Party, which is still ongoing. I remember the description they wrote about in the Addresses Project, which is an incredible installation, was saying that I think they were at Henrietta's or Cubbyhole, and they asked permission for consent to people, can I handcuff you to the bar? And people would be like, well, gosh, yes, that sounds delightful. And had all these dykes handcuffed to the bar and then said, I'm going to talk about safe sex. I'm going to talk about sex parties. And this is the launch of what would become Submit. And I had never heard that. I thought it was incredible. What's coming up next is one of my all-time favorite topics, gentrification. This queer historical geographer is delighted to help you think this through. I wrote an entire book about it, in fact. How lesbi, queer, trans people gentrified New York City, and perhaps unsurprisingly, we were gentrified out of New York City. So what is gentrification? It is a set of processes propelled by the state to financialize housing, which means you take land that we could live on and make it worth a lot of money so we can't afford to live there anymore. Infrastructural investment, which is roads, the post office, things they keep not repairing or trying to take away from us. Deregulation. Did we need the EPA? And privatization, taking things like public parks and making them private, giving them away to big oil. There are mortgage securities. Why do we need to owe so much more on the thing we bought? What's with this interest? Media portrayals, as if it's sexy and fabulous to live in the new high-rise. Real estate development. Real estate agents constantly creating new neighborhoods, adding the words green or hill in them, making everything seem faster and more exciting. And of course, there's all these financial actors such as banks, landlords, hedge funds, and homeowners and renters. Schools become more privatized. Investors, certain investors, especially billionaires, are the ones in control. All of these folks play a process in gentrification. That is, the rents keep going up. The price of property keeps going up. And property is inherently a colonial idea. And people who aren't playing the game get put away by the prison industrial complex. There's an exorbitant financial and social cost of post 9/11 securitization and hyper surveillance. It's the world we live in today, a world we still have to reshape. Which brings us to Sarah Schulman's delicious book, one of many, The Gentrification of the Mind. In it, she argues that it was the mass deaths of gay men in the village that drastically raised the property values. She's right. Because gay men couldn't get married, they couldn't leave their property to their boyfriend, They couldn't even leave their things to anyone else but maybe the family who didn't want them, or their stuff would just wind up on the street. The rents would be increased because so many gay men lived in the Greenwich Village. The property values would keep going up and up every time someone died. The historian George Chauncey would later argue that the reason why marriage became such a core idea to the mainstream LGBTQ movement for two reasons. One, you couldn't inherit in the face of the AIDS crisis. And two, since 1978, when it comes to lesbian IVF, in vitro fertilization, lesbians started having babies on their own. But could you adopt them? Could you adopt your own baby that you had with your partner? What if you get a divorce? Do you have any rights? Babies and taxes. Babies and taxes got our movement to marriage. That's really an effort to make some kind of security, right? To make some sort of understanding. In the US, when same-sex marriage was endorsed across all 50 states in 2015, people who partook in same-sex marriage were granted over 1,000 rights that they had formerly been denied. I would add to Chauncey's vision that gentrification had a lot to do with it. As property became more and more valuable, people wanted to be able to retain a sense of place, a way of connection, a place to be in the world. And gentrification is not at all something that's just in the US. We can think about what happened to the techification of San Francisco. It's so tragic. We can think about London. Who can afford to buy in London? Even renting is absolutely insane. Soho has been around for a long time in London, but the amount of work that I witnessed London dykes go through to make La Camianera or Damsel Collective come to life is extraordinary. Finding space, not to mention when you create a bar, it has to be so far from a school. You're constantly getting shut down for noise complaints. Also in London, there is this huge squatting scene. The neighborhood that became the dykey neighborhood, Brixton, is absolutely filled with these boarded up houses, and dykes just start occupying and living there together and creating these communal houses. Squatting was essential to building up Berlin after the wall fell. All of these dyke communities across Europe, a lot of them come out of a claim to housing with squatting laws where you can actually stay. All of that said, you might wonder how lesbians have the power to gentrify anything. Well, you can read my book, A Queer New York. And the short version is, we really like yoga, and we like hummus, and we like playgrounds for kids. We like community-supported agriculture. We like health justice centers. We like taking abandoned lots and turning them into gardens. We like repairing the flowers out front of the trees on the street. Generally, we're not a people who stay out that late once we hit middle age. And many of us tend to be, quote, family-oriented. And I say all that not ironically, because those are the hallmarks of the exact neighborhoods that people want to live in. Bringing gentrification back to the village, Greenwich Village has always been an incredibly white and expensive neighborhood. It's that moment that Sarah Schulman talks about in the Gentrification of the Mind, when so many gay men died of AIDS that we started to live there less and less, but we became what Theo Green calls vicarious citizens. We're those queer trans people filling the streets of the village that make it look so fabulous and gay, people coming from all over the world, all over the city, all over the US. But do we get to stay? But you talked about butch femme at these bars, like butch femme identities ruling these bars. But there's also this proliferation in the 1970s of lesbian feminist spaces that creates these amazing networks. Like you have the Women's Health Center, like St. Mark's Health Center. I remember finding that in the lesbian history archives, and my mind was blown. And then somebody told me, they make you a cup of chamomile while you got your gynecological exam, and then play a guitar song, little acoustic guitar, like Highest Les. And you had access to your file. And the bookstores, the gyms, there are women's gyms. How does that work? What is that like in the 1980s?
So the rents were cheap. So like Anna Maria Simo had a place called Medusa's Revenge on 10 Bleecker Street, and it was a woman, lesbian of color space. But the rents were nothing. I mean, they were like free practically. So you could have all these spaces. The WOW Café was first on 11th Street. You know, when rents start going up, all of that changes. So by the time you're in the 90s, space is expensive.
I worked as the lesbian health program coordinator for Cal and Lord, and we had a women at the time. It was called a woman only clinic. So it was an evening clinic where anybody could go, and they felt that there needed to be more. So one Saturday a month, we would operate a woman only clinic. And if you could come in and schedule your pap smear, but if you really just weren't ready to have your pap smear, we wouldn't charge you, and you could come back and just have the pap smear and we would work it out. But I held the hand. It was shocking how many, because I was like, if you would like, I'm here to hold your hand while they do the exam. Whatever you like, I'm up here with you, so I see nothing. Da 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 da. I can talk to you. I can blah blah blah. And it was shocking how many people chose for me to hold their hand. And then after doing the Watermelon Woman movie, like people would come up to me and be like, "Your face is so familiar," and I'd be like, "Please be from the movie. Please be from the movie. Please be from the movie." Like, because if not, then I was holding your hand.
Yes. If you didn't know already, but Valerie was in The Watermelon Woman, which is an incredible movie.
So was Sarah Schulman.
Yes, I was in it too. That was my introduction to working with Cheryl, where I showed up and there were no script.
No.
That's the working with Cheryl experience. So I just made all that up. And then I went on to do 2 movies with her, also similar circumstances. But, yeah.
When you know, you know.
This would be a good time too to look at the literature that the bars that the bars inspired. I can't help but think of Lee Lynch's work, Dyke Tales and At a Bar, and Nisa Donnelly's The Bar Stories,
and The Swashbuckler, and Jane Dolin also, Don Juan in the Village,
and Broadway, the Bebo Brinker Chronicles on Broadway at a lesbian bar. So
people,
yeah, the arts are really expanding, and you also have like Olivia Records. There's infrastructure. You guys are building so much arts infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And this is before the nonprofit industrial complex is going to come in and operationalize that money and then limit it and mete it out over time till there's nothing left.
They were huge in the growth of our culture.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Glad you mentioned.
And there were places like the Brick Hut, which Mary Watkins made an album about, and the El Rio and Esta Noche and Esquilita in New York. Yeah.
Yeah. And Pat Parker has a poem about a lesbian bar. In the 1980s, there's the photos from Jeb in the 70s. And then...
And Della Grace Volcano did a lot of leather bar photographs.
Right. They're very sexy. That's a huge list of literature, art, and film, and I will absolutely put it on queergeographies.com, but I want to highlight a few of these. First of all, Della Grace Volcano's photos are extraordinary. These leather dyke bar spaces, the sex party chain reaction, all of these amazing activists who worked against Article 28 in London. Just incredibly gorgeous and raw and exciting. And they've really shaped a lot of the ways that we see the 80s and this punk leather fashion, this fuck you. Because what else did we have to lose? Now, The Watermelon Woman, created and directed by Cheryl Dunye, is getting its due. It's been on tour again. I deeply encourage you seeing these wee young versions of our guests acting in that. It's a brilliant film. It's one of the first major Black lesbian films, and it's absolutely genius. I want to mention, because whoa, did it shock me when I read it. And very few things really shock me anymore, like woohoo! But this was just blew my mind. Jane Dolin's Don Juan in the Village is about this dyke who starts wandering around Greenwich Village. She lives there, just looking for something exciting, kind of getting into the leather scene. And by the end of the book, she winds up being sold and living as a dog. I really can't tell you. I've never found anything like it. And there's a lot of dyke bars in it, so I could not read it. But of all of this amazing work, the one thing you need to read in this entire episode is This Bridge Called My Back. This Bridge Called My Back is one of the most important books ever collected and written. I found a way to teach it in every class I ever taught. When we were talking about literature, one of my all-time favorite books to teach every semester I could teach, I just found a way to teach it, was This Bridge Called My Back.
Absolutely.
right? And I think that's a seismic shift with Cherry Morega, Barbara Smith, Audre Lorde, Christos, Pat Parker, Gloria Antidoa, Combahee River Collective are just some of the people in the book.
Well, that was because Kitchen Table Press was founded at that point.
Yes.
Kitchen Table Press was amazing. Barbara Smith, yeah.
It's interesting because what's now called intersectionality, actually was women of color feminism as expressed in this bridge called My Back.
Right.
Kitchen Table Press was founded in Boston, and it is the first women of color press. The idea of women of color is actually a phrase that comes out of this book, right? It's third world women is really the phrase that gets before this, right? And so you have women of color creating a concept of themselves, and also from start to finish, from the editing to the writing to the publishing, they made a publishing house. And the first time ever women of color published themselves. And that's that book, which is now at fifth printing? It's infinite. And it's just still passed around on Tumblr, on every resource
Well, we
ever.
also published Homegirls.
Homegirls was GCLS Book of the Year last year, the Classics Award. What a book that was, yeah.
They published Some of Us Are Brave.
What a book. Yeah, we honored Barbara Smith.
Oh, that's so great.
Snaps for that.
The very first reading I ever did from my book was with Catherine at Women Books, 1984.
Yes, the Sophie Horowitz story.
That's right.
Yeah, one of my very first. I like to think that I got your career underway, Sarah.
You did.
Well,
that is exactly the truth. You did.
There couldn't have been a more
Thank
important
you.
career to get started. It's your lasting pride of myself and the whole community for what you've achieved. So,
thank you, Catherine.
Catherine talked about what Sarah achieved, and it's worth saying because Sarah Schulman spent her entire career talking about how limited lesbians were in their ability to write, to get published, to produce plays. And it's incredible that she's being honored with a Guggenheim, a Lambda Literary Award, a Stonewall Gay and Lesbian Award, that she has 20 books, 11 fiction, 9 nonfiction, which include Gentrification of the Mind, Conflict is Not Abuse. Let the Record Show was listed as one of the top 10 books of 2021 by both NPR and NBC. Her fiction is utterly delicious. I read it on the beach. Personally, one of my favorite things about Sarah Schulman, and it's the same with Valerie Walker, is they don't shut up. They keep pushing and putting out their ideas, and they will not be quieted. I also want to point you to a book of Sarah's that's coming back around on the guitar, which is Ties That Bind, Familia Homophobia and Its Consequences. It's an incredible read, and it will really help you understand your friends who were raised in conservative religious families, or it will help you understand yourself. Familia Homophobia is real. With the resurgence of the far right, the rise of fascism and authoritarianism, it is all the more an important read today. One thing that I would love to see what you think about this. Have you guys ever heard of the lesbian master doc? Meaning master document. So when young people today search, am I a lesbian? This is one of the first things that comes up on the internet. It's a Google Doc, but one of the first things it introduces at the top of the document, are you ready? Is compulsory heterosexuality, Adrian Rich, 1980. Yes. And so compulsory heterosexuality is something you can totally look up on TikTok. Is this not amazing?
Well, there was this whole big fight, between, there were the essentialists and the social constructionists, right? Nobody remembers this, but they tore each other to pieces.
Tell us about it.
Well, there was people like the late Amber Hollabaugh, and they believed that Adrienne Rich and Lillian Faderman's theories of lesbian continuum were desexualizing. Yes. I mean, there was so much infighting, it was unreal. Somehow I managed to stay out of it at that point, but there was the sex wars, the porn wars, the social construction versus essentialism. There was all this crap, and people tore each other to shreds. Carol Smith Rosenberg, who wrote that classic article, which is called what? What's the name of it? It's like one of the most famous pieces.
The Female World of Love and Ritual?
The Female World of Love and Ritual, right. That's what started lesbian studies. And so I met her, she's in her 80s, and I was like, how come you didn't do any more women's studies? And she said, I was so destroyed by the essentialism versus social constructionism battle that I stopped doing women's history. Nobody even knows what that was.
For those who don't know, the Barnard Sex Conference in 1982 is this kind of seen as this major kind of dueling ground of people who are pro-pornography, celebrating the body, sex, what we call sex positivity now. And that's like Dorothy Allison, Amber Hollowell.
Yeah, but the joke is, okay, the fight at the time was between pornography versus censorship. And now we have both.
Progress.
Pornography and censorship. So it's a false binary.
I just know that however I explain this, someone's going to tell me I did it wrong, but I'm going to do my best. In an era of cancel culture, one must try to explain the entire history of 80s feminism in a succinct few minutes. Here we go. So in 1982, there was this amazing conference called the Barnard Conference on Sexuality. And this is the beginning of, we can call it the feminist sex wars or the porn sex wars or the sex wars or the porn wars. And it's held at Barnard College, which is a women's college in New York City, one of the Seven Sisters. It was not about sex, like, fucking sex. I mean, it was. But it was more about, with baby Judith Butler there, with socks pulled up to their knees. So cute. The wee Yale grad student they were then. At this conference, Gail Rubin, I'll do a whole post on how awesome Gail Rubin's thinking is that has made your life better. But she stands up. She's a wonderful butch-ish pro-sex, pro-leather, created the Leather Archives anthropologist, and is talking about what gender is as distinct from sex and sexuality. Her work talks about how good sex gets idealized and supposedly bad sex, like leather, BDSM, polyamory, blowjobs, is considered something that makes a person bad. Brilliant. Just brilliant. Anyway, the aim of the conference was, quote, to move beyond debates about violence and pornography and to focus on sexuality apart from reproduction, end quote. Wait, what was going on? At that time, there were these people called W.O.W. Not the WAP of today, but the WAP of yesterday was Women Against Pornography, including Andrea Dworkin. And they were saying that any pornography you made was anti-woman. There were a ton of pro-sex advocates like Amber Hollowell, Dorothy Allison, who were, hello, we can make our own decisions, and you can't tell me that all porn is bad. The lesbian sex mafia organized a radical, quote, speak out on politically incorrect sex rally. And so the conference was picketed by the anti-porn feminists, and this was a huge saga and debacle. I also don't want to miss the part where they were focusing on sexuality apart from reproduction. This at the time was mind-blowing, which should also make your heart ache and your breath catch. Now, what's essentialism versus social constructivism? Okay, so essentialist feminists believe that there are traits in gender that we have at birth because of our physical differences. And the social constructionists are like, nah, sister, that shit's all constructed. Okay, sure. And this is a kind of chicken and egg scenario that people had a massive debate about and really didn't get anywhere. We have lots of those debates. It's fine if we have them, if we just remember that we had them and we remember we did or didn't get anywhere with them, because otherwise we're not building on knowledge that we've worked through before, and we're just repeating things and agonizing ourselves. I'll be sure to include links to the Female World of Love and Ritual material about the incredible pro-sex publication On Our Backs. Also, the feminist scholar Rachel Corman's brilliant work on the Barnard Sex Conference, and of course, include a link to the Lesbian Master Doc. But also in the 80s, even though we're having the porn sex wars, is also the first butch femme nationally distributed porn comes out too. And so that's wild to think that you keep bringing up sex parties. And I think sex is something very different until HIV/AIDS too, which radically changes.
Yeah.
Well, Honey Lee Cottrell was a butch photographer, and Susie Bright and they were a couple at first. So when Susie started, and Susie, of course, was femme, so when they started On Our Backs, it had a butch femme, but it wasn't like a 50s butch femme. It was like a modern butch femme. It was a more contemporary butch femme.
And also, in addition, power play becomes more of a rich community separating off the leather and the bondage. That becomes more of a thing, like that you can say, you can name, and hear images, and we're going to provide a space where you can do.
Yeah.
Oh, the lesbian sex mafia.
I was 22 in New York City, so it was 2001 or 2002. And I saw Dorothy Allison read at the 92nd Street Y. And she's reading and she just pauses everything. She just stops and she looks up and she says, "How dare none of you participate in BDSM? What have you done with lesbian bars today and with lesbian spaces? You need to get out there. Where's your leather?" And it was just this lecture. And it was such a sudden turn. And I was like, well, what just happened? And my friend who went with me wrote a lot of pornography. And I remember looking over and they were glowing. I've never seen someone look like that during 92nd Street public reading. The 92nd Street Y is where authors go to read their books in New York City. So having Dorothy Allison get up there and say to queer youth today, "Where the hell's your leather?" is a powerful statement. As I mentioned earlier, Dorothy Allison co-founded the Lesbian Sex Mafia. The first butch femme lesbian porn was produced in San Francisco in the 80s. If you want an incredible story of an amazing person that has shaped the sex landscape for les, bi, queer, trans people, you've got to read the story of Red Robinson on the Addresses Project. Addressesproject.com is this amazing artwork where they've interviewed a number of New York City elders about their experiences and taken photos of them, the bars they hung out at, the places they created. I met Red when they were running the Submit Sex Party in Brooklyn, which means yes, I went. I'm not telling you about it. But the story that I love from the Addresses Project is that Red actually went to bars like Henrietta Hudson's in Greenwich Village and asked people if they could handcuff them to the bar and really got people turned on and excited, and then was like, "Hey, come to the sex party." Consent to just everything. We need to make a hard right turn as well, by which I mean we need to think about and respond to the far right. This is an era of Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and the religious right seething in their power. We found out in the 2020s was just the test run for the kind of vile fascism that's taking place today. But one of those ways we can rebel is how we embrace sex, how we embrace sexuality, how we embrace gender, how we make it our own. And that is the Les, Bi, Queer, Trans project, eh? That is the real queer trans project, to be ourselves, as true to ourselves as we can ever figure out who we are. I decided to ask one last important question of these esteemed women. I hope you enjoy. Do you think, why do we still need dyke bars, if you do think so?
I think dyke bars had all the things. You know, they had the drama. Will I? Will she? Will they? Like, it had all the romance. She's gonna. I can. Yippee. It also had like conversations to change your life, to change your mind, to change your behavior. You know, there was a sense of competition. Who is the butchest? What femme is really slanging? It had everything that society. It also had community. It had people sitting side by side who only got together when they got to the lesbian bar, and they drank all night and they talked shit that was not real, and they both knew it and went back to their stuff. Like, it had everything. Why is it gone? We need everything. We deserve everything.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the world's on fire, so it'd be great. So that's fantastic.
You know, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm just really proud of our generation and what we did. I mean, just the freedom, this joy that you expressed, Valerie. It's, you know, we made a lot of things possible for these dykes today that I read about all the time and what their lives are like. You know, reading the new books of what we help make possible. I'm proud to be a part of the major bar generation, proud to be a part of the bookstore generation. We've lived through a hell of a lot, haven't we? What a rocket ride. What a rocket ride. Yeah.
Catherine, I would watch you on TikTok. We got to get you on TikTok.
One last thing about the importance is because representation matters. I missed my flight because of racism. TSA, like they jacked up they were so far up my search and seized there was nothing to find. So I had to reroute. But the blessing was they rerouted me to Atlanta, and the Atlanta airport is like the brownest like me place in the freaking world. And so I'm literally like literally just like, oh my, look at us. Oh my God, like a lemming. So I'm so far out in my own head that the black bartender across the way said, "Here, come here, baby. Come here out of traffic." And like sat me down. It was like, "Girl, you look like you need a moment." It was, so representation matters. We need to see ourselves. We need to be able to gather, and not like a flick of like walking down the street, but like a sense where we can really connect. So that's another reason why we need it. All right, I'm done.
As always with a mic drop, Walker. I love it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Great to see you. So great to see you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it a lot.
So much. Thank you as always. I appreciate it.
Wow. What an episode. I am still so grateful to Sarah Schulman, Catherine Forrest, and Valerie Walker. I am so excited to say that Valerie Walker and I, because we were dying to catch up after this episode, that you get another episode of just Valerie and I. That'll be the third episode of the 1980s. Check out queergeographies.com for all the books and more, and so many resources and images and transcript with photos, because my gosh, it's delicious. My gosh, the 80s. So hard, so beautiful, and so much to learn from them. Thank you all for listening. Let's keep rocking, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to Our Dyke Histories in collaboration with Sinister Wisdom. Do share Our Dyke Histories with your friends, colleagues, fellow students, exes, crushes, or heck, use it as a pickup line when you don't know what to say in a bar. Good luck to you, brother, sister, and themster. You can easily connect with us on Instagram or Facebook at Our Dyke Histories, and come and follow me, Jack Gieseking, via my newsletter, Queer Geographies, at queergeographies.com, which is packed with all the images that accompany the transcripts from all of our episodes, and many more tales of dyke bars, queer parties, trans hangouts, as well as a myriad of other queer spaces and queries like, do dykes cruise? I have data. Never stop loving on all things Sinister Wisdom. At sinisterwisdom.org, you can subscribe, buy their books, or make a donation. Now on to our credits. We are a small but mighty team. Our Dyke Histories is recorded, edited, and produced by Jack Gieseking, and co-edited and co-produced by Cade Waldo. Our social media is designed and managed by Audrey Wilkinson. Our theme song, Like Honey, was graciously gifted to us from Kit Orion at kitorion.com. Interns for the show include Becca Moses and Sophie McLean, with additional input from Rachel Fagan. We're forever grateful to our co-producer Julie Enzer and the entire team at Sinister Wisdom, publishing since 1976. Sinister Wisdom recognizes the power of language to reflect diverse, multicultural lesbian experiences and to enhance our ability to develop critical judgment. As lesbians evaluating our community and our world, we share our dyke histories so we know more about who we are, how we were, and what we fight to never forget. Let's keep doing it, y'all.